But then I realized something about myself about a year ago, that it's a scientific fact that if I see something on social media or pops up on Yahoo that says something like, "You will never believe the size of Tom Brady's house," I will click that link every time. I do. Anybody else with me? Like I am a sucker for clickbait. And I look at it, I'm like, what a waste of my time. But so anyway, I want to show you a couple of pictures here of some celebrity homes. So the first one here, anybody want to take a guess? It's Mission Impossible. You'll never guess it. Tom Cruise, you got it. You did guess it. All right, that's Tom Cruise's sprawling estate. This is the house of Ellen DeGeneres, and she actually built it where it looks pixelated like that. I don't know if you knew that, but not just kidding, sorry. All right, the next one here. This is the house of Bill Gates. He's pretty wealthy. He's got a little bit of money. And then the last one here that I brought was my childhood idol. This is Michael Jordan's house. He tried to sell that thing for about $60 million, but found out that very few people wanted a basketball court with, the Jumpman logo on it and had all of his various things on it. And so he had to reduce that down tremendously. But that's just outside of Chicago. That's his house. How many of you ever had to buy a house or rent an apartment? Just raise your hand if you've had to go through that process. It is a nightmare, isn't it? So we're in our second house now, and we've been in our house in July. It's actually 10 years we've been at this house, and it's a great house. But I have determined that if I ever have to look for another house, I will only have one request, that there will be 6 bathrooms. I don't care if we have bedrooms. I don't care if the kids have anywhere to sleep. 6 bathrooms and 6 separate sinks. That's my first requirement, okay? Because I'm sick and tired of everyone's toothbrush ending up on my sink somehow. Go brush your teeth. Oh, my toothbrush is downstairs. Why is it downstairs? Well, I brushed my teeth in your sink. Why? You have your own bathroom up here. So that's my first requirement. The second one is I'm going to figure out, and if you know this technology exists, I'd appreciate you just let me know. I want to somehow rig my sink in that new house that's mine. I'll put my name on it. I want to rig it somehow with like some kind of electric shock charge that won't kill them, but it'll make the cow not touch the fence. You know what I'm saying? That's all I'm looking for. I just want, and that way, if someone places, and there'll be some kind of chips like in their toothbrush and, a finger ID or whatever. I mean, look, if the iPhone can look at your face and tell it's you, that technology has to exist. That way, if anybody tries to put anything on my sink, they get just a little shock, doesn't kill them, like I said, but something that says, I don't want to do that again. I want Pavlov's principle to come in here. Now, I don't care about salivating. I want their hair to stand up so they know they don't do that anymore. And so, but man, if you've ever gone through the process of buying a house or renting an apartment, there's so many things you have to look for, what your needs are and, what you can afford and all those different kind of things. So today, we're actually going to do a little bit of house shopping in the Word of God. So if you have your Bible, I want you to open it to Proverbs chapter 9. In Proverbs chapter 9, we're going to take a look at 2 houses. Now, these houses are not going to be on har.com. We're not going to know anything about the square footage of these houses. We're not going to know how many sinks there are there. We're not even going to know how many kids are in the house necessarily. We're not going to know if the parents in the house are losing their minds or not. But we are going to look at 2 very different houses. This is actually a wonderful passage of Scripture. Now, in high school, I loved English. I was one of those kids that really loved English. Went to college at HBU and studied English. That was actually my first choice as a major. We had double majors at HBU, and so Christianity and English. And so I was like the guy that loved grammar, loved English. But one thing I didn't really like to do a lot was to read. However, if I could find a poem or find something that would really kind of describe something metaphorically, then I felt like I could relate to that really well. And Proverbs chapter 9 is actually that. It's very poetic language. Solomon is actually going to write some wisdom to his son. He's continuing with his wisdom that he's been teaching from Proverbs chapter 1. And he's going to describe 2 houses. Now, here's what I want you to know right off the bat, and you need to hear this really well. Everybody in this room today, regardless of where you are in your faith with God, regardless of whether you believe in God or not, regardless of whether you believe the Bible is true or not, regardless of if you've ever read this passage, everybody in this room today is living in one of these 2 houses. Guaranteed. And you're going to probably recognize both of them in your lifetime. One is going to be the house that is built by wisdom, and the other one is built by a woman named Folly. So I want us to read about these two houses and then just kind of make a comparison between the two. Let's begin in Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 1. Wisdom has built her house, and she has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts, and she has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. And she has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine that I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight. So that's the first house, the house that was built by wisdom. Now look down to verse 13. We'll find the second house. The woman Folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of the house and of her house, and she takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. So I want to just look at this. There are two houses. There's one invitation. There are two different destinations. And then there is one decision. And I want to talk about those four things for just a few minutes this morning. First, I want to talk about the two houses. The first one was described in verses 1 through 6, the house of wisdom. And the last one was described in verses 13 through 18 as the house that is run and built and cared for by a woman named Folly. Now let's look in Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 1 at the house of wisdom just for a few moments. First of all, it's described as she has hewn her 7 pillars. And that phrase, it shows stability. It's a beautiful house. And she has prepared a feast. And this kind of reminds me of my mom in a lot of ways. My mom, when we get together for any kind of event, whether it's just my family coming up there with my 4 kids, or Sam and his kids, and Casey and her kids, all of us together, and there's 20 people in the house, it doesn't matter. My mom is going to cook the same amount of food. And it's basically enough to feed the 1st Battalion of the United States Army. I mean, it just is unbelievable how much food she prepares. You come in the house, and she's like, I went ahead and baked some Lucy rolls for you. Now, if you don't know what Lucy Rolls is, I Love Lucy had an episode. Apparently, she put too much yeast in the rolls, and they got really big. And so my mom makes these rolls that are really huge, and they are fantastic. They are just like eating clouds with butter. And but they're really big, and the kids love them. So when we get together for Thanksgiving, for example, she doesn't want anybody to be left out. And so she has, I think, 11 grandkids, or 12, 11, 12, whatever. Lost count. I don't even know how many I have. She will make each kid's favorite dessert. But not like a little taste of it, like he likes fudge, just one thing. Whole tray of fudge. This one likes Rice Krispie treats. This one over here likes orange dreamsicle. It's just unbelievable. I'm like, Mom, it's just crazy. But the one thing that I love about my mom's house is that when you go there, there's stability. My mom and dad have been married for over 50 years. They love each other. It's a safe, inviting environment. I never go there and feel like there's a lot of drama. I feel like my mom and dad have their heads on straight. They're leading our kids to follow Christ and to be good, moral people. And so that's the kind of image that I get when I think of Wisdom's house. There is stability to this house. It's not built on some flimsy thing. It's got 7 pillars, and those 7 pillars show that there's some stability to this house. My grandmother was the same way. My mom's mom, she's the one I told you about that always had orange slices for us, the little candy with sugar, and the circus peanuts. That's what you could always be guaranteed when you go to my grandma's house. My grandmother on my dad's side, they had a garden out back, and they had been married for 60 plus years, and there was just stability in that home. And that's the idea, the image that we get in the house of wisdom, that it's got 7 pillars, that it's strong, that it's stable, that it's inviting. You'll notice in those 2nd and 3rd verses that she has an animal that's been killed. She's got a feast that has been prepared for anybody that would come in to that house. Now, if you look at Folly's house down in verse 13, there are 2 descriptions. The first one is that Folly is seductive. And that word seductive, it means full of simplicity or simpleness. And I think of my kids with this. As a parent, you ever told your kids that you know how to do magic, and you take a penny in your hand and you have it, it's so blatantly obvious that you got a penny in your hand. You're like, now listen, I got this penny in my hand, but watch, I'm going to show you. And then you put your hand behind their ear and it's like, look, you have a penny in your ear, and they are just blown away. That ever happened? And you're like, dude, like you didn't see that coming, man? I mean, I literally took the penny and put it behind your ear, and they're like, whoa, dad, show mom, and I'm like, hey mom, look, I got a penny, and mom, party pooper, she's like, hey, it's in his hand the whole time. Okay, well, all right, thanks for that. But how many people fall for small little foolish tricks like that? That's the idea of that word seductive. That folly, her house, is seductive. It's always trying to trick people into something that it has a lot of promise, but it really has nothing behind it. It's kind of like the lottery in Texas. How many people in Texas play the lottery? They play and I see people in the store, they go in and they'll spend $40, $50 of their hard-earned money to go play the lottery, and the chances of winning the lottery are so small, and yet so many people are doing it because we are so prone to be tricked into things that are seductive. And in a spiritual sense, we fall for things so easily. Just like me with clickbait on the celebrity houses. We fall for something so small like empty promises. Someone says something to us and it makes us feel good inside, and so we give ourselves to a person that really in the end ends up treating us poorly. Or we make decisions in our lives to begin with alcohol or drugs or other things that can be destructive to us. And we hear someone say something and then we say, okay, yeah, that sounds good. We fall for so many things because folly's house is built on seduction. Proverbs 7 and verse 21 says this, with much seductive speech, she persuades him, and with her smooth talk, she compels him. That's from Proverbs 7 when we studied it a few weeks ago, when the man went down the street to the immoral woman's house and that she seduced him to come into her home. And we're all screaming out like Solomon was, don't go there, don't go there. There's going to be destruction. There's going to be things that are going to hurt your life. She's married. You shouldn't be having a relationship with this woman. And yet he went in there because he was seduced by her. He was tricked into thinking that what she was offering was really going to be something that would change his life for the better. The thing about folly's house is that folly is very good at what she does. When I look back in my life and some of the dumb decisions I made, the regrets that I have in my life over people and decisions, people that I was with and friendships that I had or decisions that I made, the reason I made the decision was because I was enticed by something that looked really, really good. The story is told of a mom who came into the kitchen and her son was standing by the sink and he had his hand in the cookie jar. And the mom asked the son, said, what are you doing? You've been standing here for a while. He said, I'm just fighting temptation. And we think, well, that's kind of dumb to put your hand in the cookie jar, right? But how many of you have put your hand in the cookie jar thinking that you were going to fight temptation, but you ended up taking the cookie? We fall so easily for the tricks of the house of folly. If you remember, it's a story that was written years and years ago, but was made into a movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You maybe have seen that movie. And there's a scene in the movie where the Ice Queen, who represents the enemy, Aslan, who is the representative of God and good in the movie, and Edmund is the one that the Ice Queen is eventually able to convince to do things for her. And how many of you, who remembers what she used to seduce him? Turkish delights. A little cake. And there's a scene in the movie where she says to him, if you will come with me, I have a house full of Turkish delights. And Edmund follows. And in the movie, when you're watching the movie, you're like, Edmund, don't do it. She's bad. She's evil. She's got bad intent. She wants to kill Aslan. She wants to take his kingdom, right? But Edmund goes, and I'll never forget the little elf that's helping, or the little helper comes and he says, this way to your num-nums. And you think, like, how dumb are you, Edmund, to give up so much for Turkish delights, a little piece of cake? And yet that's what happens at folly's house. She is seductive, and she tricks us into thinking that what she offers us is going to be something that's going to ultimately satisfy. But what Edmund found in the movie and what we have found in our lives is that what is offered as a house full of Turkish delights actually ends up being a house full of despair, a house full of regret, a house full of disappointment, because we decided for a moment to be seduced into the house of folly. But notice also in verse 13 how she's described. Not only is she seductive, but folly knows nothing. Folly knows nothing. on Instagram this week. I was talking to Lauren and Wyatt. They came by the house the other day or yesterday, and we were just talking. And in the culture in which these young people are living, I find it fascinating how many people don't think about how inconsistent their positions are. So a young lady that's a friend of mine this week posted something, and it was on her story, so I forgot that those disappear in a day. I wanted to copy it, but I got the gist of what she said. She said something like this: "We are to grow and be progressive in our learning. If you tell me my beliefs are wrong and yours are right, it only shows that you are not progressing and growing in education and spiritual things." Okay, now I think we have it up there, right? Okay, so now that sounds pretty good. Now I think that we should grow, and I think that we should be progressive in our learning. We shouldn't be satisfied with where we are, and we are discovering new things all the time. But then she gets to really what she's saying, and notice that phrase or that sentence. If you tell me my beliefs are wrong and yours are right, it only shows me that you're wrong. Do you see it? Do you see how painfully inconsistent that thinking is? In other words, you can't tell someone that their beliefs are right or wrong. And if you're telling me that my beliefs are wrong, that just means that you're not learning and you're not progressing enough. And I'm thinking like, so are you telling me that I'm wrong? But yeah, you just told me that we can't tell someone that they're wrong because we need to constantly be progressing. Do you see it? It drives me insane how people just don't think logically and think reasonably about life and about spiritual things and just about things in general. And the reason is because that many people have accepted the invitation into the house of folly, and she is described in verse 13 as knowing nothing. Now I'm not saying that about my friend, but what I'm saying is that what folly does is invites people in, and the idea of truth is skewed, and it's not really truth that is shown in the house of folly. And there is an attractiveness to this thinking, but it is empty and self-contradictory. For example, I'm not going to get political here, but I want to show you when your foundation is not truth and everything becomes moral relativism, and it's just whatever your idea of truth is, how inconsistent it is. So for example, in our culture, we have a debate going on politically about gender pay parity. You've probably heard about that. That we should pay women the same that we pay men for equal work. And I am 100% in agreement with that. That women should not be treated as lower or different than men. And I think any person that tries to take a position other than that would just be ridiculous. Okay? So I believe that. I believe people should be treated equally. Okay? But then in the same breath, those same people that argue for that, and I think it should be argued for, would then say, well, there's no such thing as gender. Gender is fluid. Do you see it? And I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to get in a political debate, but this is what happens when we go into the house of folly. It's like everybody's thinking is seen as equal, but in telling someone else that they can't tell you that you're wrong, that you're telling them they're wrong. You see, it's so inconsistent. And that's the description that we find in verse 13. The house of folly, she knows nothing. And when I look at our culture, when we think about spiritual things, it's like people that want to debate the existence of God. They say, well, if God exists, why does God allow evil things to happen? And I'm like, if God doesn't exist, what's the big deal? I mean, nobody thinks it's wrong or evil for a lion to kill another lion, right? I mean, if a lion kills another lion, that video came out viral this week of those two guys on the moped and the Siberian tiger came out to kill them, right? And if he'd have killed those men, nobody thought, well, that lion was evil to do that. But if a man killed another man, we would think, well, that's evil. And so people will say, well, if there is a God, why is there evil and suffering in the world? And I'm like, if there is no God, why does it matter? What are you worried about? We're just animals anyway. And so if someone wants to kill someone else, but the reason that we think that way, the reason we think about God and we don't understand evil is because we have been born with a moral conscience. We're created in the image of God with a knowledge of what is right and wrong. And that's what the Word of God teaches. That's what wisdom teaches, that we are different from lions. And yet the culture said, no, we're not. The house of folly and the house of wisdom. The house of wisdom is stable. Pillars, stabilized. But the house of folly is seductive and ultimately in the end is described as knowing nothing. My grandpa one time when I was a kid, blew my mind with a phrase, and I just wanted to share it with you. He was talking about a man who always talked big. You know, he's always going to, in East Texas, whoop somebody. You know, I was down at the hardware store, and he sold me that 3/4 inch bolt, and I told him I wanted a 1/2 inch bolt, and I told him I'm about to whoop you. You know, he's that kind of guy, you know. But he was always, and he had to do that accent too, you know. And my grandpa at the time, you know, was really old and you know, was just talking about this guy. I don't remember the guy's name. And, you know, he's always got somebody to whoop. And I've known him for 50 years, and he ain't ever whooped nobody. And he said, he's all hat and no cattle. I have no idea what that means. All hat and no cattle. And so I looked it up. I went online this week because I remember that phrase in relationship to this. And it basically means someone who boasts about big things, but there's no substance to it. Okay? And so we might say like all clickbait, but nothing substantial. Maybe not. Okay, all hat, no cattle. We'll leave it there. And what I want you to know about Folly's house is that it is all talk, and there is no foundation, there is no substance in that house that will change your life for the good. And there's an attractiveness to this kind of thinking. You see, in Folly's house, there is no right and wrong. Just you do whatever you want to do. You do whatever you feel like you should do. You're the master of your own universe. You're the king. You can make the decisions for your own life. But in the end, Solomon says it's foolishness, it's childishness, it's simplicity, it's being simple-minded. So 2 houses. House of wisdom and the house of folly. But there's one invitation to the house. Notice in verse 4 and verse 16. I think we'll have them on the screen comparing them. In verse 4, the invitation of wisdom is, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And the invitation in the house of folly is, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. Now that word simple, they want, both wisdom and folly want the simple to come in. And the Hebrew root word for simple is patha, and it means to be open wide or to be spacious. In our culture, we celebrate open-mindedness, don't we? And it's seen as a good thing. And I do think that we should be open-minded about the truth. I think that we should be open-minded and understanding of people and difference. And there's an attractiveness to this openness, this spaciousness, this having our minds open to all these different things. But there is also a danger in that. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 14 and verse 15, the simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. So the invitation to in both the house of wisdom and folly is for the simple to turn in. But here's the description of the simple. The simple believe everything. And I have to tell you, you should not believe everything. A kid at a camp recently was telling me that he read something on the internet that he thought was true, and it was obvious that it wasn't true. And I said, there are people on the internet that believe the earth is flat and argue pretty convincingly for it. But it's not true. So just because you read something doesn't mean that you should believe it. And the truth is, you can't believe everything. You can't believe that 3 + 3 = 7. I mean, you can believe that, but you would be wrong to believe that, wouldn't you? Well, Robbie, you should be more open-minded. 3 + 3 could equal 7. No, it can't ever. 3 + 3 is 6. 3, 6. That's 4. You see? Solomon teaches math. He knows that I'm right. Right? But the simple believe everything. And there is an attractiveness to this. Because what happens is you can't tell anybody that they're right or wrong. You just believe what